welcome to Butterflies and Wisdom, everyone. I know you guys were supposed to hear us on Tuesday, but due to scheduling and due to all this other craziness, Mel and I could only schedule today. But first, a quick programming announcement. For those of you who saw me letting the cat out of the bag on the Wisdom of Fashion, yes, Wisdom Fashion is set up. Yes, Mel and I are going to record it in May, but it's slowly but surely getting into iTunes as we speak. So that's what we're waiting on right now. But Mel and I are going to be tapping the knowledge of up-and-coming designers to get them not only know this, but to ask them how they would help people with disabilities. Obviously, I am no dummy when it comes to fashion. For those of you who have seen pictures of me, you know I am fully dressed in lines, and that's how I've been all my life. So I wanted to start this podcast to teach other people with disabilities how to dress beautifully with a disability, so that they have a flawless body image as well. So we're going to be talking a little bit about body image and a little bit about self-love and a little bit about confidence, all in the wisdom of fashion. But enough of me rambling on about my latest project. My other latest project is Butterflies of Wisdom. So today we're not only going to talk about solo, whether you need to do a solo show or whether you can do an interview show, but we're definitely going to talk about making your podcast pretty. And when I say making your podcast pretty, I mean how it's presented in iTunes and all the other podcasting playing apps. So what I'm going to start out with is a magical little application that I have used to design Butterflies of Wisdom logo called Canva. Canva, Canva.com. And I will put that in the show notes, or you guys can just Google it. Now, what you want to do in Canva is, first of all, you want to make your podcast artwork 1400 by 1400 and 300 pixels at that. So you want to make that custom dimensions. Now, with a graphic designer, as much as we try to tell them that it must be 1400 by 1400. Now, granted, they're human, so they mess up a little bit, but as long as we can get it to 1400 by 1400, that's fine. Now, the cool trick with Canva.com is you can actually set custom dimensions on the canvas they give you. So basically what you want to do is set it to 1400 by 1400. Then decide, okay, whether you want the logo, whether you want the wording of your podcast on the logo. I don't have Butterflies of Wisdom on my logo, the words Butterflies of Wisdom. I do on the Wisdom of Fashion, because quite frankly, if I was doing Butterflies of Wisdom all over again, I wouldn't do a solid logo. I would just do the wording and the logo. John Lee Dumas of the EO Fire even has EO Fire on his logo. So I just checked that out today. And for those of you outside the podcasting world who don't know who John Lee Dumas is, John Lee Dumas started as a Army in the Army in San Diego, got out of the Army, then went into the podcasting hemisphere and did really, really well for himself. But he came out of the Army, spent time in his car, spent time building up his business. Now he he used to live in San Diego. He lives in some exotic place that I can't think of the name right now. But he used to live in San Diego, as I said, and he's one of the top entrepreneurs with a podcast that we always go to. But my point being is that even he has the name of his podcast on his logo. So that is up to you guys. If you want a fancy logo without the naming, that is perfectly up to you guys. But that being said, because iTunes makes it so dang small, I personally wouldn't recommend the logo, the wording on the logo. I would recommend just the logo and putting the wording in iTunes. Now, you may be thinking, oh, great, I now have to upload the logo that I have never designed the logo in my life. Well, with Canva, you can add images, add text, add overlays with everything else. You can just do a podcast logo yourself or hire a graphic designer. I have hired a graphic designer for the wisdom of fashion, but that's just me. As I said, I've used Canva in the past, so Canva is a great tool. Now you may be wondering, okay, now how do I get the podcast logo onto my RSS feed and submit it into iTunes? And what you have to do is go into your settings in Libsyn or Podbean, as we mentioned last week, and you have to upload it. It will stay. You don't have to go in there and upload it every time unless you want a custom piece of artwork every time you publish an episode. No, I don't, but some people do, and then you have to go through that process again of publishing custom piece of artwork for your guest or your solo episode, which we'll get to in a minute. But it will stay in the account as long as you have the account. Now, iTunes won't accept it without the artwork or without one podcast episode on the feed. So iTunes went yucky patooey on me, what was it, on Wednesday, I think, because when I uploaded the artwork that my graphic designer had sent me, and I was very specific, iTunes had a history check. So now I'm working on that. But iTunes gets very, very picky about their artwork. Now, Stitcher, on the other hand, I'm not sure about Stitcher, although Stitcher is on the Android side, and Stitcher may have the same rules as iTunes. I believe they do 1400 by 1400. Now, since we've started making our podcast really pretty. Oh, and one other thing, this new and noteworthy thing in iTunes you have to know someone to get into New and Noteworthy. Apple handpicks podcasts in New and Noteworthy depending on the content. It's not necessarily a review thing, it's a content thing. So you don't have to have 10 million reviews on your podcast. You just have to have good content and be consistent with it. So, yeah. So that's what you guys were curious. And the iTunes New and Noteworthy doesn't affect your cover artwork in the least. So now, since we talked about making your iTunes as pretty as you guys want it, now we are going to get into the heart of this episode, and Mel just brought up a good point as we were planning the wisdom of fashion. Mel just said there are 3 types of podcasts. There's either a completely solo episode with you, just me speaking into a mic, or there's an interview format, as you've heard me done, or there's a solo episode with just you and another co-host talking. And now that is up to you. Now, trust me, I have done an interview show for, 4 years. We're coming up on our 5th year on June 15th. It went from YouTube to Blog Talk Radio to now podcasting, which, if I had to do it all over again, I would just not add 3 million people into the mix. But because I teach people about living with a disability and also being a solo entrepreneur, I kind of have to add people into the mix. So basically what Mel and I are trying to say to you is it's truly up to you, and people are asking me about the episode links, and we'll get into this next week too, about the episode links, whether it should be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Most people like 30 minutes. Most guests can only do 30 minutes. So now, am I making sense so far?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, I'm learning a tremendous amount. And as you and I discussed a little bit earlier today, I'm realizing I think a podcaster should go with their strengths. I think it's important that when you start a podcast, at least the way I'm going to do it, is you've got to really connect with your audience first and let them get to know you. Okay, so I'm not sure how you can do that without being solo first and doing it in a progression, and then as you establish yourself, on the podcast, then you can either bring on a co-host, or if you wanted to start out with a co-host format, you have to do that right away together, and you got to hope that you establish great chemistry like you and I have. You have to make sure that whatever strengths you have, you're balancing out the weakness of a partner and vice versa, and you have that chemistry and respect and of time and space, and understanding how to jump in and whatnot. So, but no, totally makes sense, and just flowing. Yeah.
You bring up a very good point. Unfortunately, with butterflies of wisdom, I am surprised my fan base has stuck with me. I've switched to formats so many times that I've kept the interview show, but I've switched formats from YouTube to Blog Talk Radio to podcasting, that I'm surprised. I have not made my fans completely confused, but once you get the swing of things, then you'll have the swing of things. Now, Now, how Mel and I are doing the wisdom of fashion is we're going to be interviewing up and coming fashion designers and asking them how they can help the disabled. But that's how we would just do it. That's how we talked about this earlier. Now, I have another solo show on Spreaker, believe it or not, if that I just simply use the Spreaker app on my phone, and that's called the Spirit of 622, and that's just me chronicling my journey with Sam Walden. And the reason why I started that one is because I and people had told me that I wasn't catering to my strengths, which was having cerebral palsy and being a motivational speaker. I've been told, when you don't do that enough on the podcast. So that's why I started the Spirit of 622, and that's why I'm going to be starting the Wisdom of Fashion with Mel over here, because I want to play to my strengths now. I'm finally learning how to play to my strengths after 4 years of doing this. Now, when talking to yourself and talking to the walls are a little bit boring, so that's why I like having a co-host, because then I can bounce ideas off that co-host, and because the interview show gets a little tedious after a while. And so, but as Mel said, as Mel chimed in, it's really up to you guys the way you want to do your podcast and the way you want to do your artwork as well. But just start out with one format and stick with it, and be consistent and tell your fan base what's going on. Be transparent with your fan base. I repeat, be transparent with your fan base and tell them, okay, the show's coming out on Tuesdays, which the Wisdom of Fashion is coming out on Tuesdays, so I'm making that up. Thank you very much, because I'm going to leave it natural, unedited. Thank you very much, Mel, for saying that. So I'm not using that as an example. We are sticking to Tuesdays. We've decided Tuesday afternoons. So starting in May, Tuesdays afternoons, you get the Wisdom of Fashion. So be consistent with your fan base. If it's going to be coming out Wednesdays and Thursdays, just be consistent with your fan base. Don't be so helter-skelter that you can't keep your head above water. I'm actually assisting another podcaster, Kim Sutton of the Positive Productivity podcast, and she goes, today my download numbers have been not so good. I said, Kim, you need to keep your podcast consistent, and you need to tell your fan base what's going on. And she goes, you're right. And then we dropped that conversation. She went gulp when I told her that one. And so basically what Lipson does, and unfortunately iTunes is very wonky. It only shows the first 100 episodes on the feed itself in iTunes. So iTunes will show this and 99 others, but iTunes doesn't show episode number 1. I wasn't dead. But and most feeds do that in iTunes. They only show the first 100. So iTunes, I don't like. Stitcher, on the other hand, I do like, which Stitcher comes on the Android side, so any iOS side. So I may eventually get rid of my iTunes podcasting app and resubscribe to everything in Stitcher. So, it's really up to you guys and how you want to make your podcast pretty or not. And it's really up to you guys whether you want a solo episode or have a co-host or have just you. Now, make agreements with your co-host. Don't do what I did and just make agreements with your co-host and just say X, Y, and Z is happening and tell the co-host. I've learned that one the hard way. And so just make agreements with your co-host and do not use music in your podcast. Do not use Bob Dylan in your podcast, please. John Lee Dumas, who does not use podcasting music in this podcast, just talked about that this morning, actually. He just published an episode of E.O. Fire that is really transparent of what he's made in his business, and one of the tips he had was how not use music in your podcast. So please, 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 if I hear any more podcasts, if I hear any music in your podcast, I will certainly come and find you and certainly call you out. I did that with another podcast, and that other podcast went gulp, and I have heard that in the past week, that people have been using royalty songs in their podcast, and of course, that's a no-no. So, Mel, do you have any questions for me?
You know, it's you were just mentioning about music. I've heard podcasts that have music intros in them and all that, and it ends up almost being like a radio show, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it's either or, you know. It just, I guess that just depends on your taste. But to me, that could actually almost be a distraction, you know. I think if I had a song that was gonna play right before I came on, it's almost as if you're listening to a radio show. I'm not sure I want to be associated with a radio show. I think I would just like to be the only thing that my audience hears, so that you're not actually wasting any time. You're actually starting and ending with you. You know, right? I mean, that is why they're listening to you, isn't it?
Yeah. You bring up a good point. I was bringing up the legality end, but now that you bring up that good point, the intro's one, but music before you bring on guests is another whole kit of fish entirely, because I like the just simplifying the guests. Now, granted, when I'm on interviews, they do the interviews and then they do the editing aspect of it. I was, funny enough, I was just on, and I'll give you guys a link when it comes out. I was just on a podcast the other day, yes, a live podcast, and what radio stations are trying to do now, because radios are dying on, because of XM satellite radio, which all vehicles have, including my new Volvo XC60, and so all vehicles have XM Sirius XM radio. Do you know how hard it is to find the AM and FM button in these vehicles? Now it's completely difficult. It's not easy to find, but now that radio shows are actually dying, I know that radio stations are solely focused on podcasts. I know that NPR is now switching over to the podcast model. I know that the radio station that I was doing the podcast through is now solely focused on a podcast model. So Mel, how do you feel about that since you brought up the radio station and music thing?
You know, I rarely listen to the radio, to be honest with you. And if I do, it's going to be a radio talk show on AM. There's one local out here in the Bay Area called KFBK. It's more sports driven. So during the baseball season, I love the San Francisco Giants. So I'll listen in on that.
Yeah.
Specifically at like 7:30 in the morning, because there'll be a segment just done by the broadcasters of the games, and then that's it. You know, or unless they have a special guest, or I might go to their website, and if they have certain interviews that they've recorded, I might listen to that. But as far as listening to the radio, I rarely do it, especially for music. I play my own playlist on my phone, probably because I'm not really in a setting where I can listen to a radio. I don't work in an office where I could play a radio quietly in the background. I'm always on the go.
No,
I don't know what the dynamic of radio is now, or what the survival rate of it in the media. You know, especially when people have their own choice now as to how to create and generate and find the type of content they want to listen to, right?
Well, it's so funny you say that, because I am not in a cubicle by any means. I will be, and for those of you who do not know, I am teaching third grade music of all things, and so they're not necessarily into podcasting yet, but at least I can give them a little taste of podcasting and what not to do and how to do it. But I think the next generation is further along than Mel and I, actually, because we grew up with Sesame Street on TV, and that was the end of the 90s generation, and it definitely wasn't the 2000s generation. But I know that some schools back east are getting into podcasting, where the students show their work. And the moment my music teacher hears this, my colleague, she will go, "Why can't you teach the kids that?" So I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Here's another aspect of teaching. But for those of you who still like AM/FM, that's fine. But AM/FM is dying. I can tell you that right now. AM/FM is dying. So because of Sirius XM satellite radio, and because of podcasting, and because of all that good stuff, we're free to make contact. And so basically what I wanted to say to close out this episode, and then I'll let Mel say his final words, is be consistent, make good content, but the timing and the cover work doesn't really matter. It's consistency and make good content, you guys. And I will let Mel close out, and let's see what Mel has to say.
Thank you, Wynn. You know, I look at anything that's created as a work of art. And doing a podcast is an artistic endeavor that's always evolving. You get better and better at it. And if you think back now, what are we on our third or fourth month? When we've created a momentum where we're getting better and better, our chemistry is getting better. And it's one of those things, whether it's a printed art like a logo, or if it's your voice, or whatever the case may be, always be true to yourself so that you're expressing exactly what you want from your heart and your soul. Don't be afraid to take a risk, because art is risk. Some of the greatest works of art, and I studied Italian Renaissance art history in London, and I can tell you that a lot of the greatest masterpieces on earth were started over and over and over and over until it was done right by the artists. So don't be afraid to create your best work. Don't be afraid to be true to yourself, and be your own true voice, because if you really want to add value, which is what my mission is on any podcast, you absolutely want to be honest. You want to be speaking from the heart and soul. Don't be afraid to take a risk. And even with your logo, work within the parameters, and when you know it, you'll know it's done right, and that's it. And that's why I love us working together, Gwen. So there you go.
Yeah. And as Mel said, podcasting is a real art. And then we'll talk next week about studying the craft and some of the podcasts that I actually like, and maybe Mel can share, because podcast episode 3 in this series is going to be studying the craft, and then podcast episode 4 in this series is actually putting it out there and sticking it and making your voice known, and whether you should have feedback or not. So that's podcast episode 3 and podcast episode 4, so you guys know. And so I am going to talk about studying the craft, so maybe that Mel could come up with some of the podcasts that he likes, and then maybe we can compile a list and state it on air so that you guys know how to get a podcast and start studying the craft if you want to do a podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed another fabulous episode, and we will see you next Tuesday, Mel and I will see you guys next Monday. And, oh, by the way, I'll try and film the exoskeleton coming to my school where I work, so you guys can get to see that and get to see the expert walk in at the expert being man box now. Oh, and before you see that video, I want you guys to go not only Google Amanda Boxtel, but just listen to her on my podcast. She's around there somewhere, so I can't remember the episode number, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll stick the Amanda Boxtel episode in this episode, so you can at least hear about the equipment I'm using. And she was the first woman to crowd fund exoskeleton, which we'll talk about in episode 5 of podcasting. Speaking of crowdfunding, whether you should start a crowdfunding campaign or start a sponsorship. That's what I was trying to say. But I will see you guys next week, and you guys have a good, safe weekend, and we'll be back here on Monday. This episode will come out on Tuesday, and before we do that, I will make sure to link up the Amanda Boxtel episode so you guys can hear about technology and technology in a good way. So we will catch you guys later, and as we said, I hope you guys have a good weekend, and I hope you guys enjoyed another fabulous episode. Thanks to you guys.
Thank you, Wynn.